Good afternoon. Good
Hi,
morning for
how are
you.
you?
Good, and yourself?
I'm good. I'm sorry I'm a little late.
No. You're not at all. Actually, we are 1 minute
Oh,
before
all right.
the schedule, so we are okay because it was supposed to be. Well, it was announced to be 3:15
Oh,
Spain time, so we were like 1 minute earlier. So it's
all right.
uh, okay. So thank you, Bobby, for joining this live chat with me. I really appreciate that you took the time to just share your valuable knowledge with all the people that's going to join us, and especially to myself. So thank you once again for taking the bite and be part of this project.
Not a problem. It's a pleasure to speak with you again, Vicente.
Thank you. It's been a long time since last time I met you, but you haven't changed nothing.
Really?
Yeah, you look still the same.
Oh,
So
yeah,
it's
Alicante. I don't know. I think we saw each other after Alicante, surely.
yeah. I cannot recall where, but yeah, definitely it was because after Alicante you did a couple of camps in Europe. I remember you did one camp or a course with Selco in Pula, and
Yes,
you've
yes.
been around. So most probably will be any competition, or well,
Yeah.
I still don't know. So I would like to give you the floor and introduce yourself because I know your role within the Triathlon America has changed slightly the last couple of years, so I don't want to make any mistakes saying something that is not correct. So you will please introduce a little bit yourself and what you are currently doing with the US US 80 is called.
Yeah, USA Triathlon. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I work for USA Triathlon. I used to be the performance advisor in the lead up to Rio, and I used to work with some of those individual athletes. And I was the women's team leader in Rio. And then subsequently, I became the development coordinator. So I started doing a lot of work with juniors and talent identification. And now my role has altered slightly again. And now I'm the talent identification coordinator. So I work with the juniors as well as with talent identification right across the spectrum, from the youth athletes all the way up to the elites, the pre-gold medal elites.
Right. You based in Boulder in Colorado, right?
Yeah, I am based in Boulder. Actually, I'm in Boulder County, so I'm about 8 kilometers east of Boulder. I live in a little town called Lafayette.
I've never been there, but I can't wait to just go and explore the area because I hear anything bad about the place. So let's see if everything goes to the normal, and then we are able to travel again. So we're gonna have just less than an hour to discuss a couple of topics. And as I said when we had the previous call, this is like an informal chat between you and I, although there are some people that are listening and trying to pick some of the topics we are discussing. But I said to myself, I might need like a couple of days to actually catch up with everything because, well, obviously you've been in the field for a long time and your expertise in different areas is so extensive. But since this live chats were aimed for the development coaches that are attending our courses and etc. I decided to pick the topic of running mechanics or the principles of running itself, because I'm seeing that nowadays the new coaches that are coming on board kind of have lost the sight to what it really matters. So they go too far too soon or too high too soon. So I just wanted to pick your brain and let you share what do you think is important, from the foundations. So
Yep.
So
these are very, very critical topics because, I think a lot of training is designed just to approach the physical, but I think the physiological responses, but I think it helps a lot of coaches if they distinguish between mechanics and physiology. You know, maybe think about it as the chassis of the motor car, or, you know, as well as the engine. And so if you look at the amount of exercise scientists and coaches that are specialists in working on the development of the engine and the capacity of the engine and the output of the engine, especially in triathlon, in running, that often doesn't match up. You have these athletes that have really big engines, but they don't have good chassis. So they can ride the bike really well, and if they have a good stroke, they are very effective in the water as well. But that engine doesn't transfer to the running for a number of reasons. The main reason being that they cannot get consistent training, because on the bike and on the swim, it's quite easy to train hard and not suffer the consequences. Whereas in running, you get, you know, structural and functional consequences. You'll get muscle breakdown, you'll get you know, soft tissue breakdown, tenderness breakdown, as well as structural breakdown in terms of stress fractures and so on. Now, you do get fractures in the other sports, especially in cycling, but not nearly as much as you get in running. So the understanding used to be that if you trained progressively physiologically, that form would function. In other words, the athlete would adapt to the training. The trouble in triathlon is the athletes cannot run sufficiently frequently to adapt that way.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is that the swim and the bike create mechanical limitations. They have physiological advantages, but mechanical limitations. And not only that is that the average triathlete, because of the swim and the bike, is typically larger or has more muscle mass than the runners. So they have more volitional forces going on when they hit the ground. And then the last thing that is important is that triathletes lose proprioception on the bike. So, you know, there's plenty of studies that show as we get older, we need more cushioning because we hit the ground harder. Now, the same thing happens in triathlon. When you ride the bike, you hit the ground harder. So one of the first things I ever learned in triathlon is that your racing shoes need to be slightly heavy, you know, slightly more significant, slightly more cushioned than if you were just plain running. So I think that's a good place to start, is distinguishing between the mechanical and the physiological, and then realizing that, you know, progression rates are not as natural in triathlon because the other sports inhibit, you know, your postural issues.
I'm happy you brought the example of the cars, because this is actually also the way I'm using to explain physiology. Right? I always bring the same parallelism, saying that you might have a Formula One car just parked in the garage, but if there's no software, meaning the psychological aspect of the athletes, doesn't really matter, because the car won't go anyway. Same way, if you only have a gym, but the chassis is not good, you're going to also have the invitation. So we need to see the preparation of the training of any athlete that is under our hands as from a holistic approach, because everything matters. And coming back what you were saying about the mechanics, I think this period, because in Spain we've been over 60 days pretty much locked down in our places, has been a good time for emphasizing in those aspects, because you can do drills inside your place. You can work on your hip flexibility, proprioception, etc., etc. So I try to see it always from a positive way, that this period has brought us the chance to develop those things that I'm not going to say they are not important, because they actually are, but the coaches tend to forget. So these are the ugly guys, you know, in any party that nobody want to dance with them, or you know. So that's how I think. So
I think from a coaching standpoint also, that a lot of coaches are kind of fearful of you know, looking at running mechanics, whereas they're not fearful to look at stroke or pedal mechanics. You know, because they're quite, I wouldn't say they're simple, but they're second phase movements. I think a lot of times, you know, an elite running coach or an elite runner will say, I would never mess with my form because I will lose economy, which is initially true. But if the advantage is, finally, there is now research in the last couple of years that shows that working on your running mechanics not only prevents injuries and provides consistency, but provides advantages as well.
Yeah, so
performance advantages, correct?
Definitely. And this is, I was having a chat with the Colombian Federation just 3 days ago, and there was one of the coaches who was working with youth and juniors that was telling me, okay, how can I measure the running economy? So what, if you're working with youth and juniors, you definitely don't need to test for that at this stage. So make sure the technique is the correct, make sure they are capable of running off the bike with a good technique, with a good posture. And then if you get all this sorted, you can go into the lab and just measure it. But once again, I think most of the coaches are forgetting about the basics. And the basics is as simple as standing on the track and just observing, right?
Yes, exactly. If you look at long course athletes, it might have been harder in isolation because you can get frustrated and go too hard when you are indoors and when you are trapped, and you can develop your VLA max too much and your capacity at VO2 max and your economy might change. But for the juniors, it's an ideal chance. I see that I think it was Matt Hauser or one of the athletes in Australia did well over 12 kilometers of drills in his backyard, you know, which was a very interesting post. But it just shows you, I've been getting a lot of videos from people in their passage or on their treadmill or in the garage doing drills. And you're right, you can do all of these things indoors, and you can work on, as you call them, the stepchildren, the red-headed stepchildren.
Okay, yeah. I was trying to find a term that actually defined what I wanted to say. But, okay, so I'm gonna keep that for the future. Yeah, so definitely. So how do you think now that most of the athletes has been, as I said, running on a treadmill? Let's say, for example, the Spanish elite triathletes been running in a treadmill for over a month and a half, or almost 2 months. And luckily, okay, the gate will happen in 1 year time, which is not that bad. But
yeah.
How do you think that spending a lot of time training on a treadmill might affect the performance outdoors?
Yeah, no, this is a super question, and I wish it was black and white, but it's not. So from a device perspective, treadmill is very uniform. So your foot lands the same way all the time. So you can promote overuse quite easily on a treadmill, especially if you don't mess around with the elevation. So for a start, I suggest, you know, everybody, even if they're doing their easy run, that they push it up by 0.5%, anything between 0.5% and 2% for their average runs. But mostly that they play around between 0.5% and say 4 or 5%, even on a flat run. Just change it all the time, because the gait is too similar and it's really easy to get an overuse injury. And also, not all treadmills are created the same. Some of them have slats and a cushioned bed, and some of them have only got a belt and a very hard deck, and they don't have spring loaded on it. So they're very hard. You know, so you have to be careful that, you know, if you tend to run a lot on dirt or on grass or something like that, that you've, you know, got to be careful with how you implement that treadmill. The other thing with the treadmill is I believe, and I don't have any research to prove it, but I believe that it makes your hamstrings a little lazy. So in other words, I think your hamstrings lose a little bit of conditioning because the hamstring's job is to decelerate the shank. But if you have a backward leaning shank and you put that down on the treadmill will pull it underneath you and do work for you. So it has some advantages, but I mean, some disadvantages, but you know, I think the advantages of the treadmill outweigh those disadvantages. You've just got to pay attention. So maybe some extra eccentric hamstring work, you know, some kickouts and stuff like that, that you get, you know, that you keep your hamstrings conditioned to that deceleration movement. You know, that's all I would say about the treadmill.
I do believe the use of the treadmill is like everything else. So the overuse is bad, but the non-use might be also bad. So that when I'm delivering the level 1 or the level 2 coaching courses, I only allow the coaches to use the word depends couple of times, because everything depends. So they ask you a question and you are like, oh, no, that depends. Okay, but I want to know, depends on what. So definitely. Coming back to the running.
I think athletes should also, from a psychological standpoint, play around on the treadmill. I think maybe when you're doing your easier stuff on the treadmill, you can, even watch something or listen to something. But I think with the quality workouts, maybe concentrate on the effort and so on. Not only is that safer, but it might accelerate your conditioning period if you have more of a focus. But every person is different. Some people train really well with music when they do, and some not. But it's just something that each individual athlete should play around with.
Definitely. I do believe here in our case in Spain, everybody has caught up with all the series and the movies they had, pending to watch, because we spend so much time doing indoor training that there is nothing left to watch.
Nothing
left to watch. It's crazy. So,
well, the advantage of that is if you're watching something, you're prepared to go a little easier. If you're not watching something, you might be going too hard. So
Don't you think that's the case? Because I lately watched the documentary that Movistar has released, Any Given Day, I think is the title in English. And without you realizing, you're climbing as fast as they are doing, because there are some stages where it gets really, really, really tense, and you're like, you start suffocating, and then you need to hold on for a second and say, what am I doing? I mean, the guys who are racing are they, not me. So it depends on when you are watching, you can get really excited and overpush. Yeah, definitely.
That's very good.
Bobby, I wanted to ask you, because you have a large series of videos and DVDs published, and et cetera, where you show a lot of drills, you do a lot of also video analysis, et cetera. So what kind of tools and resources do you use? Obviously, since the aim of these tools are for development coaches that they don't have large budgets, what are those tools and materials or equipment do you use for your daily job when it comes to analyzing the running gates and et cetera?
Okay, so you're talking mostly for the coach, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Nowadays with the quality of the cameras on the iPhones and on the digital devices, they provide everything that you need. In fact, I've got my camera and I never use it anymore. I just use my phone, But the big thing to look at is that the frame density, that is the setting, whatever mech analysis tool you use, and there's a couple of really good ones out there, but the frame density that you use is important. So you probably need around about 240 plus frames per second. Because if you think about it, the elite athlete's foot is on the ground for 20 milliseconds, so around about that's kind of the ceiling for the elite athlete. Mm-hmm. And so if you're looking at specific mechanical points like first contact, and you're using a camera that's only showing you 24 frames per second, you're never going to find that spot. And that's the key piece there, is having good frame density. And then I think, obviously it's a bit of a budgetary requirement, but the device is cheaper than your average smartwatch, is something that can measure stride length and stride rate. And then even the higher end ones can measure ground contact time. They can measure leg spring stiffness. They can measure form power. So they can measure how much the athlete's moving left to right instead of forward. They can measure vertical oscillation. And you can set, your training intensities based on power rather than heart rate or rather than velocity. So, those are good tools. But, when you're doing video, it's probably best to do it on the treadmill. Otherwise, you need a truck to run along next to an athlete, because if you're standing still and the athlete is running past you, you only have one frame where the athlete is actually in front of you. And so, I'll try running along with the athlete and so on. But I never make, when I'm doing mechanical analysis, I never make categoric statements. I would say the same as you, depending on the angle, it looks like, you know what I'm saying? So you're looking for general trends, but I think probably your best tool is just knowing what drill fits with what anomaly that you are seeing. I think that's your best thing. Is so a good eye,
Yeah.
high frames per second. You can use a stopwatch to measure stride rate. It's not that difficult. You can even do stride rate in a group. To just see where people sit. You can whistle every 15 seconds and they can count a left foot or a right foot during that time. I think you saw me do that drill for the juniors. So there's a number of ways where you can work on the mechanics of a group, and with a lot of the drills, even if an athlete is very good at that aspect, the drills serve a neuromuscular purpose. So you can't, if you're having the athletes execute the drills correctly, you can't miss. But if you tell them to do drills and then you turn around and go and look at what the workout is, then it might not effect.